For much of his adult life, Larry Hedrick lived with disabilities that left him unable to care for himself. By the time he reached 61, his condition meant he could no longer bathe, feed, or even fully communicate without the help of others. Every part of his routine depended on caregivers. Nurses and aides managed his meals, monitored his health, and guided him through the most basic parts of daily life. His vulnerability was constant, and it was this dependence that placed him in a long-term state facility called Hopemont Hospital, located in Terra Alta, West Virginia. The building housed nearly 100 residents, many of them elderly or severely disabled people who needed structure and around-the-clock care. Life inside moved by schedule. Meals at the same hours, medications on rotation, baths and hygiene set by staff availability. Now, on January 4th, 2024, his day was going quite normal for him. Throughout the day he did his normal routines, but by the afternoon it was time for his bath. And as he was disabled, he needed help getting to the designated bathroom, so the staff got him there. Now, this facility had mechanical chairs to move patients safely in and out of the tubs, and staff were expected to test water temperatures carefully and monitor residents closely and ensure that every bath was conducted within strict safety limits. On paper, it was a procedure designed to protect people exactly like Hedrick. So he was transferred into the bathing system that afternoon. One caregiver was assigned to help him with the bath, Kayla Beard. So she had the tub filled with water and had the chair lower him in, and what should have been a short supervised routine began. But the safeguards that existed to prevent danger were not followed. The water in the tub had reached approximately 134 degrees Fahrenheit, far above safe bathing limits. At such a temperature, burns can occur in seconds. To put that in perspective, water at 120 degrees can scald within 5 minutes. At 130, serious burns form in under a minute. At 134, deep burns happen almost immediately. Hedrick, being disabled, was unable to move or call for help. He was left immersed for 47 minutes. Now I bet you are wondering, what about the caregiver? Well, after lowering him in, she walked away without checking the temperature of the water. In nursing homes, baths are supposed to be short and supervised, usually between 10 to 20 minutes, and often less if the resident can't communicate. Leaving someone unattended for nearly an hour is far outside normal practice, and that's what she did. Nearly an hour passed without any intervention, and when she finally returned to the room, the injuries he had sustained were catastrophic. His skin had suffered severe second and third degree burns, with large portions of his body blistered, charred, or peeling. Some areas were so burned and so deep that nerve endings were destroyed, leaving skin waxy or blackened, and others blistering had ruptured, exposing raw tissue beneath. The damage covered enough of his body that doctors would later describe it as life-threatening from the moment it had occurred. She pulled him from the tub and notified Delilah Clyburn Hill, as she was a registered nurse. At that point, she had a duty to treat the injuries properly, but apparently she didn't. Now, we don't know what she was doing, whether she was charting, checking on other residents, or just flat out ignoring the situation outright, but whatever she was doing, it wasn't what she was supposed to. And we know this because there was no effort from her trying to treat Hedrick, so no cooling of the burns, no dressings, no pain meds, and the most bizarre thing of all, no one immediately called 911. So Hedrick was sitting on the metal chair out of the tub, suffering because she wasn't even trying to treat him. He was just sitting there, suffering. Now, it's not stated anywhere for how long, but eventually someone finally called 911. By the time paramedics finally arrived, Larry was still in agony. His skin was burned so severely that the large areas had already begun weeping fluid, soaking through whatever thin coverings the staff had draped over him. The smell of scorched flesh filled the room, and every moment sent shockwaves of pain through his body. When EMS got him into a stretcher, they could see the extent of his injuries immediately. Second and third degree burns stretching across his lower half, wounds so deep that recovery would be nearly impossible without specialized care. He was rushed out of Hopemont and transferred to the West Penn Burn Center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There, doctors and burn specialists began aggressive treatment. Intravenous fluids were pumped into him to fight the massive losses pouring out through his damaged skin. Strong narcotics were administered to try to dull the relentless pain, though even heavy sedation only blunted it. Nurses covered his body with sterile dressings, but those had to be changed again and again, each time ripping away more tissue and reigniting the torment. For a week, Larry lived like this. Every hour brought a new battle. His body was in hypermetabolic overdrive, burning calories at a furious pace in a desperate attempt to heal. His immune system was compromised, leaving him at risk of sepsis. His vital signs swung wildly as doctors struggled to stabilize him. Family members sat watching helplessly as he groaned and twitched in pain, wrapped in bandages, tubes running in and out, and machines tracking a body that was failing. The visible injuries were horrifying. In some places, his skin was bright red, raw, and blistering. In others, it was pale and waxy, evidence of third-degree destruction. Where blistering had ruptured, there was nothing but exposed tissue, a wounded surface that stretched across much of his lower body. These were injuries doctors compared to fire victims, and they all came not from an explosion, not from an industrial accident, but something as ordinary as a bath. On January 12, 2024, 8 days after the scalding, Larry Hedrick died. His body simply could not withstand the trauma. The death certificate tied directly to the burns he had sustained in that tub at Hopemont. Afterward, investigators began piecing together what had exactly gone wrong. What they found was damning. Staff had reported hot water problems weeks earlier. The thermostat was malfunctioning, allowing water to reach dangerously high temperatures. But nothing was fixed. Kyla Beard, the CNA, failed to check the water and walked away after lowering him in. Delilah Clyburn Hill, the RN, failed to act when told about the injuries. And those two failings, one of action and one of inaction, a man was left to suffer and die. Both women were later charged with felony neglect of an incapacitated adult, resulting in death. Prosecutors say Beard caused the burns by leaving him in scalding water for 47 minutes. Clyburn Hill, they alleged, worsened his suffering by failing to provide even the most basic emergency care after the injuries were discovered. The evening at Louis Armstrong New Orleans International Airport followed its familiar routine. Flights rode in one after another, lights blinking across the apron as ground crews positioned chalks, cones, and equipment. The soundscape was the same mix it always was. Engines winding down, the rumble of tugs towing carts, backup alarms beeping, radio squawking with instructions. At around 10:30 p.m. on August 30th, 2022, a Frontier Airlines jet had just parked, and the ramp workers employed by GAT Airline Ground Support were in place to unload it. Their job was one most travelers never think about, making sure luggage comes off the aircraft swiftly and gets onto carts for the short ride to the terminal. Now, one of these employees assigned to this task was 26-year-old Germani Thompson. She was a basketball player in her college years and alumna of Riverside Academy in East St. John High School in Louisiana, and later played at Heston College in Kansas and Tougaloo College in Mississippi, where she earned a degree in sociology. Friends and family said she was vibrant, athletic, and ambitious. That night, she was on the ramp wearing her safety vest, part of a crew that had done this hundreds of times before. The key piece of equipment in use was the boat loader. It looks like a truck with a conveyor running alongside its frame, tilted up to reach the aircraft's cargo bin. Luggage is placed onto it at one end and comes out at the other, where workers grab each bag and stack it on metal carts. The machine is simple but full of hidden dangers. The rollers that drive the boat create tight gaps, nip points, that will catch and pull in anything that crosses them. Training emphasizes this. Tie back long hair, remove jewelry, and avoid loose clothing. Germani was stationed at ground level, receiving the bags as they came down the conveyor. She repeated the motion dozens of times. Reach, lift, pivot, and set the suitcase into the carts. The belt kept running, feeding more luggage into her hands. The floodlights cast sharp shadows and the noise of apron made communication difficult, and every worker focused on their specific task. The pace was steady and the work physical but routine. Then, in an instant, something ordinary became catastrophic. Germani leaned toward the belt to grab another bag. Strands of her hair fell close enough to the edge of the conveyor that the roller seized them, and the belt did not tug gently. It clamped and wound with mechanical strength, pulling her head toward the machine. and this force was irresistible. Before she could react, her hair was entangled, and the momentum of the belt dragged her face and neck directly into the rollers. The violence of that moment is difficult to overstate. The belt yanked her head forward with enough torque to fracture her cervical vertebrae. Witnesses described her body snapping toward the machine and collapsing. A scalp entanglement at that speed can rip skin from the skull, tear muscle, and twist the neck until bones give away. In Germani's case, the medical description was blunt: a broken neck. For the coworkers who saw what happened, the image was seared into their memory. Hair trapped in steel rollers, body crumpled against the loader, and the sudden transition from routine work to horror. Chaos erupted on the ramp. The emergency shutoff was hit and the conveyor went still, but the damage was already done. Workers rushed to free her, tugging at her hair, pulling her from the machine, and laying her on the ground beside it. The sounds of the airport continued around them, air units humming, carts rolling, while a small group of ramp workers screamed into radios for help and tried to figure out how to save their colleague. Paramedics were called immediately, but nothing could really be done. The injuries were just too catastrophic. A broken neck from such force compromises the body's ability to breathe, cuts off blood flow, and often leads to near-instant collapse. Even so, responders attempted everything possible. She was lifted onto a stretcher, rushed to an ambulance, and taken from the apron to the hospital. For those who remained, the image of her limp body leaving the scene was unbearable. Not long after, word spread that she had been pronounced dead. The physical reality of what she endured is harrowing. When hair is pulled into a conveyor, the scalp is stretched with tremendous force. The skin can tear from the skull and what is called scalping, leaving raw bone exposed. If the head is forced toward the roller, for the victim, the experience is sudden and overwhelming, painful and terrifying in the seconds before consciousness fades. Germani's death not only shocked her immediate team, but the wider aviation community. Ground handling is dangerous work, but fatalities like this are rare. Statements came quickly. The CEO of GAT expressed devastation and condolences, calling it a tragedy beyond comprehension. Her family was crushed, and her mother spoke publicly, describing the unbearable loss of a daughter who had been full of life and promise. The highway construction site in Bright, Michigan was like many others that summer. Cars rolled past in narrow lanes, orange cones marked the boundaries, and heavy equipment sat perched on disturbed soil. Workers in reflective vests moved in and out of view, managing a job that combined excavation, utility installation, and road work. The crew that day was working on a Michigan Department of Transportation project along Grand River Avenue near the I-96 interchange. They had been digging and setting up structures below grade, the kind of infrastructure most people never see, but everyone depends on once the road is reopened. Among the men on site was 23-year-old Ryan Matthew Starnes of St. Clair Shores. He was not just another laborer, he was there with his family. His grandfather was the foreman overseeing the work, and his uncle was on the crew as well. Construction runs in families, and Ryan had been learning the trade directly from those who had done it for decades. He was young, strong, and carrying forward the work ethic passed down to him, part of a multi-generational team used to long days and hard labor. The centerpiece of their work that afternoon was an excavator positioned at grade. Its operator maneuvered the boom and bucket into a trench where utilities had been tied into a concrete structure. Ryan was in that trench, guiding and assisting near the fixed concrete while the bucket swung in to move soil and make space. Excavation is always a balancing act. The operator can see the big picture from the cab, but often blind spots at the edges of the cut. The man on the ground has the closest view, but is also in the danger zone if machine and concrete close the gap. Now, it was a little after 3 in the afternoon of June 30th, 2025. The machine's steel bucket swept down and into the space where Ryan was working. In an instant, its arc lined up with the concrete structure, and Ryan was caught between them. The bucket struck him and pinned him against the unyielding surface, and in less than a second, his body bore the full force of hydraulics designed to move tons of earth. There was no time to jump aside, and no place for his body to go. The sound of the impact cut through the noise of the site. The operator froze the controls, crew members shouted and rushed in, but Ryan's body had taken the blow and the injuries were immediate and catastrophic. A steel bucket driving a human torso into concrete can shatter ribs like twigs. The rib cage that normally shields lungs and the heart is crushed inward, with bones puncturing tissue, and lungs can collapse, spilling air into the chest cavity where it suffocates from within. The spine compresses and fractures, and if the abdomen is caught, the liver or spleen can rupture, flooding the belly with blood. The pelvis can break apart, a ring of bone shattered by pressure it was never meant to absorb. Despite all of that, Ryan was still alive when they reached him. His body was broken, but his heart was still beating, and he was conscious enough to know what had happened to him. His uncle was there seeing the horror up close. His grandfather, the foreman, was the one who reached for him first, holding his grandson in his arms and the bottom of the trench. It was a scene of impossible contrasts. A young man crushed by a machine, and the man who had taught him the trade clutching him, trying to comfort him in the very moment the trade took him away. The crew called for help immediately. Radios barked with urgency, supervisors shouted up to flag down emergency responders, and within minutes, Brighton police officers arrived, followed by Michigan State police troopers. EMS was dispatched, and they climbed into the cut and began trying to stabilize Ryan where he laid. His injuries were classified as critical from the start. He was secured onto a stretcher, lifted out of the trench with careful movements that must have caused him immense pain, and taken toward the waiting ambulance. His grandfather and uncle stood by, watching their family member being lifted away, the smell of diesel and dirt mixing with blood and sweat. Inside the ambulance, medics worked against the clock. They gave oxygen to compensate for crushed lungs, fluids to replace what was leaking eternally, and pain medication to blunt what could never truly be stopped. Ryan remained alive long enough to reach the hospital. He was rushed to the University of Michigan Hospital in Ann Arbor, a level 1 trauma center, where surgeons and doctors attempted to reverse the cascade of injuries. But crushing trauma of that scale overwhelms even the best medical care. Internal bleeding fills cavities faster than it can be drained. Organs that have been lacerated cannot be simply patched, they fail entirely. Muscles pressed under tons of force begin to die and release toxins that poison the body once circulation returns. Even if his bones could have been rebuilt, his lungs and heart had already been compromised beyond repair. What honestly makes his final minutes so horrific is the combination of pain, awareness, and helplessness. Unlike an instantaneous death, Ryan lived long enough to feel his body breaking down. Every attempt to breathe would have been like inhaling knives, ribs grinding against punctured lung tissue. Blood filling the chest cavity made each breath less effective, leaving him short of oxygen and his vision dimming at the edges. His abdomen may have been distended with internal bleeding, each moment sending shockwaves of agony. His heart would have raced, pounding in his chest, trying to compensate for blood loss. His skin would have grown clammy as circulation faltered. He likely looked up to his grandfather and uncle, understanding their faces, understanding his condition, and fearing what was happening to him. Now, of September 14, 2025, the investigation is still going on, so we don't know if someone was criminally charged in connection with Ryan Matthew Starnes' death. All available reports described it as a workplace accident.
And now, folks, it's time to say goodnight. We sincerely appreciate your patronage and hope we've succeeded in bringing you an enjoyable evening of entertainment. Please drive home carefully and come back again soon. Good night.